Jump all in. Don't hold back, because as long as you hold back, this will not work. That's been my experience. As long as I thought I had any part of the solution at all, I mean, even a little bit of the solution, it didn't work for me. No matter how much I wanted it, how much I needed it, it didn't matter until I was able to say, God, I am powerless. I cannot do this. If it happens, it's going to be you.
It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Okay, folks, today we're going to do something a little bit different. First, we're going to start off with a follow-up from Buddy, and then right afterwards, we're going to jump into his story. On the last week's episode, I discussed an intervention that I had with a really good friend of mine, and it was just like one day of living hell. Within less than a week, the kid had already gotten kicked out of the treatment center. He was being disruptive. He was complaining. He was threatening. He wasn't grateful, and he wasn't ready. And so, he got out. I got a message from his mother that she's like, hey, do you have the number of the other treatment center? He got kicked out of the other place because he didn't have his ID and blah, blah, blah. So, of course, I call up the center and they're like, are you kidding me? This kid was totally disruptive. He was being a bad influence on the other patients. He wasn't ready. So anyway, Buddy had emailed me and he had said, hey, listen, I've got a story that I'd like to share a little bit in reference to intervention, and it has to do with my son. So I thought it would be a good idea to get Buddy's feedback, because Buddy's not only a recovering alcoholic who it took what it took, but he's also has to deal with it as a parent. But before we hear from Buddy, I just want to play this recording I got from Danielle last week, who also expressed her gratitude for getting an opportunity to hear an episode from the perspective of family members of drug addicts. So here's what Danielle had to say.
Hi, this is Danielle. I'm calling. I wanted to just thank you for your amazing podcast this past Tuesday about, the people who love the addicts as well. It was just really great. It was exactly what I needed to hear on that day. I'm somebody who loves an addict, and I do listen to your podcast every Tuesday because it makes me feel really good, and I'm able to understand a little bit better about what my addict goes through and what has gone through. And then I was having a really tough time this past week, and just listening to that Nar-Anon type of podcast really just struck a chord with me and was exactly what I needed to hear. And just hearing you describe your day, kind of going through what it was like to be helping an addict, it felt like that you were describing exactly what I've gone through for 3 years or so. So I just really appreciate that, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I look forward to Tuesdays because I get to listen to your podcasts, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Danielle, thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit about what's going on with you and the addict that you've been living with for over 3 years now. It's not easy. There's no easy answers, and this is why I'm trying to have more episodes with family members of addicts, so that maybe in the course of all this, there'll be an aha moment or some sort of a message in there that will help you make the decisions in your life that it's going to help you. Because in many cases, you're going to have to help yourself way before you're able to help the addict. They really need to, in many cases, find that rock hard bottom on their own. And the more us as family members or loved ones enable them, the longer it takes for them to find recovery. So anyway, again, Danielle, thank you so much for sending in that recording, and we hope this episode helps. So without further ado, let's get Buddy on the show. Buddy, how you doing?
Doing well, Omar.
Buddy, thanks again for joining us a second time and giving us your feedback now from the perspective of a parent of an alcoholic and a drug addict. So, Buddy, I'm going to turn it over to you, man. Tell us a little bit about your experience after hearing my story of what you went through.
I want to talk about my son a little bit. I don't want to tell his story, and I'm just going to say enough about him to just to qualify what we had to deal with, and then talk about how I dealt with it more than him.
Great.
But because, it's all the same. It's just a different person, and it's our reaction to that and how we handle it that I really wanted to address. And I think that's where my experience, strength, and hope can maybe help someone else having to deal with the same kind of thing. Just to qualify, my son, he started having problems early, kicked him out of the house twice for alcohol. Second time, I found a half-drink bottle of vodka. When he came in, I told him that, hey, you're going to have to leave, and I'm pouring this out. And we got in a fight over a half-drink bottle of vodka. That's how important it was to him. So my wife called the police. Never had the police called to my house before, ever. So police came, arrested him, took him to jail. When the court case came up a few days later for bail, I went and told the judge to keep him. It took me years to get to the point where I could do this. But I told him, I said, keep him. I said, maybe he'll learn something there. And he asked him, he said, son, he said, you think you got a problem with alcohol? He said, no, sir, I don't think I have a problem at all. And this is after problem after problem. And he said, well, I'm going to let you sit for 24 hours and think about it. So he sat in the tank for 24 hours, came back the next day, said, son, you think you got a problem with alcohol? Yes, sir, I do. I have a problem. So he learned quick how he got, yeah, man. He learned quick how to respond. And anyway, I didn't set bail. I didn't get him out of jail. I didn't bail him out. I guess to this day, and that was a year and a half ago, I don't know how he got out of jail. I guess he bail's bondsman. I guess worked with him at 18. I don't know. But what I had to realize was that I can no more sober him up than I can sober myself up. I have a responsibility toward him, but it's not a responsibility to make him sober or to fix him. I can't fix him. And I thought about him like I think about sponsees. What would be best for him? And I knew I just had to turn him over to God and just get out of the way. Let it take what it takes. And that's really what I believe. I think it takes every drop, and I can't circumvent that. And I do not want to circumvent that. And I don't want to prolong that for him or me. The misery is just not worth it. So I just gave up control and turned that over and had to work at it. But I continue to turn over now. And it hasn't been 3 months ago. He came. He's doing better and, working and paying his rent and doing everything now. And he said, Dad, I understand that everything you did was for my good. You weren't trying to harm me like I thought. I was just really angry. And he did a quasi amends as much as he knows to do. And I introduced him to AA, and if he needs it, it's there. And if he hurts bad enough, he may end up there. For him being an alcoholic or not, it's up to him. It's not up to me. But I had to learn how to be right-sized about what I did with him, and I was determined not to enable that behavior. No more than I would for anyone else. So just because he was my son didn't make any difference. I couldn't fix him no more than I could fix anybody else. So that's hard to do. That is real hard to do, especially with a child. But that's pretty much my experience with dealing with my son. But, I just could not fix him. I could not in any form or fashion. And I just had to turn that over and leave the results up to God.
And, buddy, how many years were you dealing with this?
2 years I dealt with this. And within that 2 years, I kicked him out twice. Well, his mother actually dropped him off 1 o'clock in the morning one morning and said, hey, I can't deal with him no more here. And she's a great woman, and she was at her wit's end. And she said, I can't do it anymore. And he was just, he was rebelling, teenager. He was 16 then. I tried and worked hard before I got that tough with him. I had boundaries, and he knew that if he went outside those boundaries, that there were going to be consequences. So he was willing to take those consequences. When I kicked him out the first time, he said, where am I going to live? I said, I don't know, but it's not here. It's not here.
Right.
And so this is when he was a senior in high school.
How old is he now?
So he'll be 20 next week.
So this has been going on roughly about 5 years.
Yeah. I didn't have to deal with it the first part.
Right.
But and he's been out of the house now for the last year and a half. I didn't tolerate it very long, because he wouldn't change his behavior.
Right. So does he live on his own?
Yeah, he lives on his own, works, pays his rent, all those things. So he's growing up, and but I believe I did what was right. Actually, I'd gotten a new sponsor at that same time who behaved the very same way when he was a teenager to his family. So he could come from the other side. He was highly intelligent. My son was star student, just like my sponsor was at the top of his class. And God just puts the right people with us to help us through these things. We're just not in control. We're not in charge. There's a God that's not me, and I don't have to take responsibility for that. That's what I really gained from it is I don't have to carry that. I can turn that over just like I do alcohol, and just like I did try to do everything else, and I get the same results.
And the other day when I know you reached out to me because you heard the story, and then right before we started this interview, you asked me, hey, is he still in there? And I said, no, he's gotten out. And he goes, yeah, I figured. And why did you figure he was already out?
He just didn't sound from your story. He didn't sound willing, but not to say that wasn't what he needed though. To see that, I went to a rehab before I eventually sobered up. And I left during the interview process. I don't think I mentioned that when I was telling my story, but we all need everything, all the circumstances, all the situations. I think we need every bit of it, just like I need every drop I drink. I don't think I can short circuit this in any form or fashion. But yeah, he didn't sound willing. I don't know. Maybe I could have been wrong, but it doesn't sound like it in that situation.
Well, again, I thought it was a great opportunity to just discuss this topic a little bit, because for me, it lasted a day, and then when he got kicked out, I said, I'm done with this. I told him if he got kicked out of here, I was done. This was my part. And I like what you said though too, buddy. The thing is that he did get a chance to see this. He did get a chance to watch somebody love him unconditionally and do their best to help him, and that there is a solution, and that there is a better way to live. Throughout the day we were discussing a lot of my addictions and what I went through and what my life was like. So he did get a taste of what it's like to be sober, to help people, to be on the other side. He did get that from me on that day. As tough as I thought I was being, I wasn't being that tough at all. I thought I was, but the reality of it is that tough means you got to be prepared to lay the cards on the table hard and say, here is the deal. This is what we're going into. Is this what you want? Are you willing to accept this? Yes or no? If there's anything other than yes, then any other answer is a no, correct?
Yeah, and you got to take the emotion out of it. I mean, it's our job to carry the message and to be available. And you stayed sober that day.
You got it.
And that's what, when AA started, if I remember correctly, they went almost a year with no one sobering up after Bill and Dr. Bob got sober. And Bill Wilson was working with people, and he told his wife, he says, nobody's getting sober. And she said, but you're staying sober.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got to get out of the results business, Omar. It's not about results. It's about us doing our part. And our part is not the results. Our part is doing what's in front of us today and leave that, like everything else, up to God. And that way, we don't have to carry the responsibility of someone sobering up or carry the responsibility of making it happen or fixing something, because that's not our job. Our job is to carry the message and do the will of God for the moment and just leave the results up to God. That's part of learning to practice these principles in all our affairs. But that's tough with my son, because I have an old sponsor that carried his son around and still does to this day, and he's 50 plus years old and still bails him and does for him and all. He said, just wait till you have a son. And I did. And I said, I'm not making a mistake. Sponsors either set good examples or sometimes they set bad examples for us that we can learn from. And I said, I'm learning from his mistakes. I'm not making that mistake. So, but all that was God doing for me, and getting, he knew a long time ago what was going to happen with all of this, and prepared me over this time to work with my son in this situation. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah, no.
Without a doubt, either God is or he's not. There's no in between on this thing, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So, is there any advice in particular that you can give to a mother, a father, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a sister, a brother that is currently dealing with an addict? And when I'm talking about an addict, I'm talking about a guy that is just like where you were at with your son, where I was with my friend's son, in the sense where the disease has gotten such a horrible hold on them that they've just transformed into another person. And all they do is create harm and wreckage in the lives and in the homes of their loved ones. What can you tell them?
I would make the same suggestion that I would to a sponsee, and that would be to think of yourself as an unassociated party. Let's say someone was sitting down telling you that they had a friend that their loved one was doing this and this. The advice you would give them, which is take all emotion out and treat them as if they were not your loved one. In other words, don't do special things for them. This is what I tell sponsees. I said, listen, if you have a sponsee and they don't want the program, tell them come back when they're ready. And I have a family member that was drinking, and their spouse came to me and said, what do? I said, buy them more liquor. They said, what do you mean? I said, they've got to drink enough. You can't short circuit this. They've got to drink enough and get out of their way. Just get out of their way and not enable the behavior. Not, in other words, keep feeding them, money or whatever. But in their situation was a little different. I was being a little facetious with that. But I said, in other words, don't try to prevent them from drinking. Don't try to hide it from them. Don't try to keep them from going to the store and buying. Just get out of the way and let it run its course. I think we need every bit of it, Omar, and me trying to enable that behavior and keeping them from having consequences from their actions. Just let the consequences happen. That's what I chose to do, and I think I did the right thing, because I've seen the opposite, where you try to prevent those consequences. Bail them out of jail, pay for attorneys, pay their rent, all those things that that they need because they're not behaving like they're supposed to. They're out using their money for drinking and drugging. So I kind of take the opposite approach, and it's hard, but I believe that's what's in their best interest. But if you can look at it as an unassociated party, like this is not your loved one, but if someone else were telling you this story, what advice would you give them? Well, for the most part, you'd probably tell them, well, kick them out or quit paying their rent, or don't, all those things that you think, why in the world are they doing?
Yeah, don't
enabling them. Exactly.
Yeah, stop enabling them.
Don't enable.
But I couldn't agree with you more. I love the advice of disassociating yourself from the situation. I have often said that to my own sponsees, not on this theme, but when they go through their own life crisis, where they just can't seem to find their way out of it, and even my own suggestions seem to kind of go in one ear and out the other, I ultimately I ultimately look at them and say, okay, if I was your sponsee right now, and I was telling you exactly what you're telling me, what advice would you give me? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to spit back at me the same suggestions that I gave them in the first place. So there's no real wiggle room. It is or it isn't. When you're ready, you're ready. And the only thing that you can offer is to be there for them emotionally and to support them if they're going to be taking a positive road. If they're going to be moving in a direction that's positive, you're there to support them. If they're calling you desperate because they can't pay their rent, hey, sleep on the street. All right. If they can't eat, hey, how'd you get the drugs in the first place? There's things that you did. There's manipulation and lies and stealing and all this stuff that you did to get the drugs. But now all of a sudden you don't have any money and you're coming to me. And chances are if I give you 1 penny, it's all going to go to drugs anyway. So why should I enable someone? Or, I could have just given the money straight to the rehab center and said, here, I'm going to donate some money here to some people who really want it, right? I did this for my friend's mom, because she is my friend. She's the person I've known for all these years. So my weakness was her, but when it all went down in the end, it was real easy for me to detach from the situation. When I found out he got out, when he left, I said, well, that's it for me. Good luck. Mm-hmm. And I walk away.
Yeah, my son was talking to my ex-wife about needing some money, or this is back during that time. And she said, well, you should talk to your dad. She said, Dad, he sees right through me. He said, there's no need me talk to him. And he understands, and he appreciates it. He came to me, like I said, not long ago and said, listen, he says, I understand now what you were doing was for my benefit. Yes. And I said, yeah, I love you. And I want to do what's best for you. And what's best for you is for you to figure out this is not a way of life that's going to benefit you. And the only way you can do that or by things being difficult. And I don't learn by things being easy. It's normally by things being difficult. And it's the same in that regard, too.
I think that's great, buddy. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And in the future, if someone were to ask me, what should I do? I'd know exactly what to say. So thank you, buddy.
It's all a gift, man. It's still love. It's just tough love. You're loving them by doing that. You're showing them the best. In my opinion, in my situation, the best love I could have shown was by just letting God work it out in their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, folks. So now let's jump into Buddy's story. But first, a little Share Podcast news. Would you like to receive the most popular AA devotions free in one distribution? Transitions Daily delivers daily devotions from 24 hours a day, AA Thought for the Day, Daily Reflections, Big Book Quote, Just for Today, As Bill Sees It, plus more. You can get the daily distribution via email, private Facebook group, or Twitter. Go to dailyaaemails.com for more information. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends, in meetings, and with sponsees in recovery. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. Now back to the show. Hey, buddy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, so. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. It's great to have you on the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing well, doing very well. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, buddy. So let's dive right in. Tell us about how your life is today, your hobbies, exercise routine. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
I try to start the day with recovery. I read, I do a group of devotions in the morning. And I want to warn you beforehand, I also do a lot of Bible in my recovery. When we talk about this, you'll hear about how I came along and how I started on a spiritual journey years and years ago. I use a YouVersion app on my phone, and I do a lot of, I do the message version of the Bible, and I do a daily, the New Testament through every day. And I get a lot of what we talk about in AA out of what I read there. And then I do all daily devotions, and I get on my knees every day and I pray. And that's how I start out my day. Then as far as exercise goes, I'm a runner, and I try to run 2 or 3 times a week, depending on how I feel. My age is catching up a little bit. I used to could run through any kind of issue. Now I have to pay attention to that.
Right.
So I do that, and I'm a long distance motorcycle rider. That's what I do as a hobby. I like to do rallies, and I travel all over the U.S. and riding motorcycle rallies. So I do a good bit of that. It's like a scavenger hunt on a motorcycle. Really is a lot of that. And there's
a scavenger hunt?
Yeah, like a scavenger hunt. We'll have a rally. Let's say, for example, I did one out in Montana.
Okay.
I rode out to Montana about 1,000 miles a day, got out there, and then we had a 36-hour rally while we were there. And I covered about 1,800 miles, I think, in that 36 hours. And you have to go and you have different tasks to complete, and then you have points based on what you do. And it's real good. I enjoy it.
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
Do a lot of that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Actually, that's how I found your program. I listen to podcasts when I ride, and I was looking for recovery-related podcasts and came across you. And, man, I've really enjoyed your program. So,
well, thank you, buddy. We've enjoyed having you.
That's pretty much my hobbies and what I do now. As far as work goes, I've been involved in real estate for a number of years. I'm 50 now. Started investing in real estate in my early 20s. So I started with rental houses, and mostly now for a living, I flip houses now, a few houses a year. So I'm still involved in real estate, pretty active. And it gives me a lot of time for service and working with folks in the program.
That's awesome. And, that's where you already touched on it, and it's very important, the spiritual aspect of our recovery. And, you touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to let you expand a little bit more. How is it specifically that you maintain that spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power?
I learned from the other guys in the program and from my sponsor and from the other people that I really learned when I got in to stick with the winners. Those that had something that I wanted, those are the guys I hung around with. And I took this thing seriously, even though when I start telling my story, it took me 6 years of in and out before I was ever able to really start putting some time together. I knew that AA was the answer for me. So what I do is I really try to base my life around service. I found from the very beginning that I had to make it about something other than myself.
Yeah.
And I paid attention to the guys around me. And I have one fellow that I learned a lot from. He travels a lot and he doesn't catch a lot of meetings on the road. And he said that what he does is he actually just finds someone to do something for, even if they're not in AA. And it's the first time I'd heard that. And I said, how in the world would that help? And sure enough, it does help. If I make my life about something other than myself, God seems to get in there. And especially, if I don't know what to do next, we're always told to do the next right thing. Well, a lot of times I don't know what the next right thing is. And when I don't, I just try to find what's the least selfish thing that I have on my plate. Do that or find someone to do something for. And as I do, usually I find my way. So, so that's a big part of my recovery. And that's what I teach my sponsees too.
I think that's spectacular. And it's 100% true. Any type of service, whatever you're doing to help somebody else that takes you out of yourself is absolutely connecting you to a higher power.
We know that, from reading the big book, we know that selfishness, is the root of our problem.
Mm-hmm.
We know that for me to drink the way that I drank, I had to make life all about me. I had to, even more than what I would have normally, so that I was able to keep alcohol as my God, really, because everything revolved around alcohol. I would have my appointments during the day, try to have those done as early as possible so that I could start drinking more as early as I could. And alcohol just dominated my life.
Absolutely. So speaking of which, how much clean time do you have and when is your anniversary date?
My anniversary date is November 10th of 2008. So that's just a little over 7 years. Now, I started in AA back in 2002. And so it took me 6 years. Actually, I started in 2002. So it took me 6 years in and out before I was really able to put any time together. And from my very first meeting, I knew that AA was the answer. That's where I got my hope, was that very first meeting. I saw people who I could tell drank like I drank, and I knew I was a lot smarter than them. And I was able to, if they got it, I knew for sure I could figure it out.
Right.
And which was a part of my problem. But it took 6 years of in and out to make me willing to do what it took for me to stay sober. And that really goes back to that first step of being powerless. It took 6 years of getting beat up for me to be powerless, to the point that God could step in and do something in my life and help me with this thing.
Well, it's December 1st now, so you just recently celebrated 7 years, right?
Yeah, back on the 10th. Sure did.
Congratulations, my brother.
Thank you, sir.
And how old were you the first time you drank or used drugs? And more importantly, how did they make you feel?
I was 13. Actually, I was on a Boy Scout outing, and one of the older guys bought us some tall Budweisers. So I had me 2 Budweisers for my first drunk when I was 13. But, it really didn't, it wasn't the magic pill that you hear a lot of people talk about.
Right.
For me, it wasn't. It was okay. I enjoyed it, but I didn't start seeking alcohol then. I really did not start drinking alcoholically till my late 20s, early 30s. So I went for a number of years without drinking. And then once I did, though, it was on. So it didn't take long at all. But no, for me, it wasn't one of those things where I started pursuing alcohol immediately at that point. It didn't work that way for me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, buddy, you're all warmed up, buddy. So it's time for me to turn this show over to you. It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally, your journey into recovery up until today. So, buddy, take it away, brother.
Thanks. So for me, I've always been looking for a spiritual solution. I knew that there was a spiritual solution to my life because I've always thought there was a hole there. I've always felt that way. I was never happy with myself. I was never happy with any accomplishments that I had, but I always knew something was lacking. So for me, shortly after that first drunk, I got involved in church. I got involved in a real active youth group. And I stayed active and had what I would think a good relationship with God, as good as you can have as a teenager, that kept me out of a lot of trouble. And that continued on into my 20s. So all the teenage drinking, most of that, I did not even, I didn't deal with at all. So I drank very few times up until my late 20s. And then by the time I got to my late 20s, I had a business that failed. And with that business failing, I thought everything I touched was supposed to work. And I had a business that just failed altogether. And when that happened, I started drinking. And I actually credit alcohol for saving my life. Because if I would not have had alcohol, I think I probably would have blown my brains out at that time. I really do, because it was a major down for me that I thought that I tied my success, my values to my success so much that I just couldn't deal with it. So alcohol saved me. But, they have a Japanese saying that you have a drink, the drink has a drink, then the drink has you. And it wasn't long the drink had me. And I could not stop drinking. And it had me. And I continued every day drink for, this was only 5 or 6 years that I did that. But I started having some real physical problems from it. And I didn't realize my wife was fixing to leave me and all these things going on from my drinking. But I'd had no other issues other than some physical problems. And I had pancreatitis from it. Was in the hospital for 6 weeks, 2 surgeries, lost 60 pounds. Was on a ventilator. They told me that, told my wife to pick out my pallbearers, that I was had a 50-50 chance of living. And I was in my mid-30s at that time. So, so it was tough. Yeah. Yep. It was tough. Got out of there, got to feeling better, started back drinking. So I did not have the solution, but I knew it had me. I even went to it was funny. I went to a rehab once. I was honest with my doctor about it. He said, well, let me send you to a rehab. So I had rental property. So I always carried a pistol all the time because either I had money on me or I was fixing to pick up money. So I always carried a firearm. And I went to this rehab and I happened to have this little pocket pistol. And they started interviewing me and they said, okay, buddy, have you ever considered suicide? I said, yes. And they said, if you did, how would you do that? And I said, I'd probably shoot myself. They said, you have a firearm on you? And I said, well, yes. And they left the room. And I said, oh, shit. And I jumped up and ran out the door. And I didn't go back. So that was my first experience with rehab. So, and then I went to a psychiatrist. I did all the things before I got to AA, because I said, I'm not going to AA. That's just for losers. I said, there's no way that AA would work for me. So I went to a psychiatrist meeting and we had all different kinds of addictions in there and had a lady beside me that was a nurse that was stealing scripts for Loratab. And I was looking, I said, how stupid is that? And I'd go out and get in my car and drink and drive home, and I, it just, it didn't add up. It didn't make sense to me. So I thought that AA was more of that. So I didn't think that it was going to do me any good whatsoever. And eventually I got to the point to where I would just look for anything. And my wife was on my case and everybody was after me. And I said, I have got to do something. So I went to my first meeting. And when I went to my first meeting, before that, I checked into rehab and I went through a 6-day program just to dry out. And they suggested I go to AA. I went to a meeting in there, but I really didn't get much hope out of it. I went to my first meeting after that, an independent meeting outside of the rehab, and I got hope there. I got hope at that first meeting. I saw folks that had drank like I had drank, and they didn't drink anymore. And I thought, if it would work for them, I know it would work for me. So that's when I started my journey in AA, and I found me a sponsor. I started doing what they said. I found a sponsor. I worked the steps through to the best of my ability, but I still just was not able to not drink. And I could not make that spiritual connection. Looking back on it, I had no idea. I did the steps, but I just was not ready. It just took more for me. And, I'm a firm believer in providence. I believe that it takes what it takes. Yeah. And it just takes what it takes. We can't short circuit it. Someone asked me the other day, I have a relative that was drinking pretty heavy and their spouse asked me, said, what do I do? I said, buy them more. They said, what do you mean? I don't need to keep them from it? I said, no. I said, let them drink all they need. I said, because that's the only way that they're going to get to the point that they're ready to move on. I agree. But that's, that's the attitude. I just don't think, even with my sponsees, I'm not responsible for their sobriety. I'm responsible, like with this, for sharing my experience, strength, and hope. That's it. And they'll glean from it what they can. Mm-hmm. But I started AA and things, I took those 6 years, and I came to meetings during that time. I came to meetings drunk. Unfortunately, I did chair some meetings drinking.
No way, really?
I did. I'm not proud of that, but I was scheduled. I showed up and I went ahead and did it because I knew AA was the answer.
Yeah.
And AA was the answer. So I kept on and I kept coming and kept coming. My first sponsor, he toughed it out with me through that whole deal. And actually he left, moved when I sobered up, but he was there for me that whole time. He was a tough old Army air traffic controller. And man, he was hard on me. He would critique what I said in meetings and he'd say, "You don't need to say that in a meeting." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "What you said was not right." And he said, "By the way," he says, "you don't even need to talk in meetings." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You don't have anything to share in a meeting that people need to hear." He says, "You have no experience, strength, and hope." He says, "All you have is inexperience, weakness, and despair." He said, "And you save that for me." He said, "You come to a meeting to listen or to share when you have something that they need." And he said, "So you save that for me." He says, "Don't use that meeting for a sponsor." He says, "Yeah, you got a sponsor." He says, "When you got a problem, you come talk to me about it." And I took that to heart. And he was tough on me. He kept me more or less in line as much as he could. And he said, "Don't call me if you've been drinking." And I wouldn't. And then when I'd sober up, I'd call him. We'd go have breakfast and talk about it. He said, "Okay, why did you drink this time?" And this went on like every week to 3 months, for 6 years. But I kept on because I knew whether I was getting it or not, didn't matter. I knew that AA was the answer. Regardless, I knew that AA was the answer. So once I started putting some time together, I started seeing that the guys that were making it were the ones that were active. And so I continued to get more and more active in AA. Then a few years ago, I prayed and I said, "Father, I think that you're really wanting me to get more involved in service." So I on purpose went to meetings that had a lot of newcomers so I could attract some new sponsees, some more sponsees. And that worked out good. And then as that went on, I felt like I needed to do even more as far as service goes. And one thing I really wanted to do was learn how to practice the principles of AA in all my affairs, because I knew that from the beginning that there were some things about AA that I had not seen correctly. Like the first step, for example, I thought it said that I was powerless over alcohol, that my drinking was unmanageable. But it doesn't say that. It says we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives are unmanageable. So I knew that I found out from time that alcohol was just a symptom. Mm-hmm. Alcohol was not my problem.
Yeah.
I came to AA because I thought alcohol was my problem, but I found out it wasn't. I have a living problem. I have a thinking problem. Alcohol is just a symptom. The big book says we've got to get down to causes and conditions. So with time, I started seeing that and I said, okay, well, how do I do this? And the more I read, the more I studied, the more I studied the principles of AA and the paradoxes and all the precepts that the whole program revolves around, I saw that I had to make my life about something other than me. So I started looking at that and I said, how am I going to do that? What do I need to do? So I just prayed over that and paid attention. And I said, okay, God, if you want me to do more service, put some things in front of me for service. So what I saw was, I thought God would send these big things because, I can do so much more than I do. And I'm so smart and I can do all these things and I'm so successful that, God, what do you got for me? I'm sure it's going to be something huge. Well, what God did was put 3 men in my life that needed simple service. One was a gentleman that had been in AA for, since the late 80s, and he was in a nursing home. And I found myself going over once a week to see him, go help buy his groceries. And as he was able, we started going out to a meeting, and that was his. Sometimes he got out on Sunday morning and came over to a meeting, but every week we got out on Friday and went to a meeting, went out to eat at where he liked to go and go buy his groceries. And I did that every Friday for over 2 years. And I still do it now a lot of Fridays. He's not doing as well now and he's not able to get out anymore, but God put me in a place to where I was doing simple service. And I think that's why, if you look like in the New Testament, for example, where Jesus said, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say go love the Gentiles or some other country. It was your neighbor. Yeah. And I think what God does is he wants us to put us in a place to where it's the people around us that we're to affect. Those are the people that we're to influence. And it starts at home. And so I started, God put 3 people in my life for service, and 2 of those were not even in AA. One was a fellow that was paralyzed from a bicycle accident. And I went and visited and took him out and did things for him. And I had another retired gentleman that I'd known for years that God put back in my life. And then Jim W. is the gentleman in the nursing home. So I just found myself helping him. And it was kind of interesting, though. There was another gentleman in my home group that was in the hospital with he'd had some heart problems. And I was over visiting one of my friends in a town near, and I felt impressed I should go visit this other gentleman. His name's Clint, for my meeting. And I said, okay. I said, I'll go visit him. He wasn't a particularly good friend of mine. I didn't know, that much. I wasn't a friend of his. And I said, well, I'll go anyway. And so I went over and visited him. And come to find out, Clint had been doing a service work that where he had taken all of the devotions, the normal devotions for AA, as Bill sees it, thought for the day, all the ones, the daily reflect, all those. And he had put those in an email, and he had a distribution that he sent those out to every day. And he'd been doing this for 14 years. And I didn't even know it. He had over 10,000 people in his distribution that he sent to every day.
Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's huge. And he had no one that he was going to pass this service to after he went to the great meeting in the sky, So
Right.
He had nobody that he was going to pass this to. And I just went over and visited him. And when I did that, I got to know him a little better. And he shared this with me. And he said, I want you to do this for me once I'm gone. So I've been helping him get that together. And we've got almost 11,000 people on the distribution now. And we add 2 to 7 people a day. But I never knew he was doing this. And this is the kind of service that I thought God would have me doing, something that's touching a lot of people. But that's not the way it started. It started by me visiting someone in the hospital. It didn't start with God putting that before me. So I think a lot of things that we do that are small, we may think, that's not what I need to be doing. But I think we got to start wherever God puts us,
Yes.
I think it's a lot more simpler than we make it.
What is it?
Yeah.
A simple program for complicated people, right?
Oh, that's it, man. And it's, and my part in this whole deal as I mature in AA is so much less than what I thought it was. I used to think I had to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I had all these responsibilities and all these things that I had to take care of. And I have found that I am only responsible for doing the next right thing. And the rest of that, I can leave up to God and let him deal with that. I don't have to deal with it. So as time progressed, I got a different sponsor, one that was very carefree about his finance. And he's a wealthy guy, but he just had total trust in God about his money and about his kids and about everything about his life. And I wanted that because I didn't have that. And I wanted that. And so I asked him to be my sponsor, and he started working through the steps with me. And, a sponsor can't share what they don't have. You can't, this program's about sharing your experience, strength, and hope. So I'd urge you, if your sponsor doesn't have what you need, I would ask God to send you the right person to share with you what you need. And this gentleman was the right one for me. And he taught me how to start practicing the principles in all my affairs, and that I had to give up the care about my work. And the way that I had to do that was by just doing what was in front of me to do. Some days it had to do with real estate, and some days it didn't. Now, all this happened at the same time that I started wanting to do more service. So I found myself, instead of working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, I found weeks that I didn't work but 4 or 5 hours at most. And I'd be sponsoring someone, be going meeting with someone. I'd be doing this, doing that. And I said, God, how can I make a living and not work no more than I'm working? And money just kept coming in. I couldn't understand it. And then I realized that my job was to do what was in front of me to do. If it had to do with real estate, so be it. If it didn't, so be it. But I had to give up the care of my provision. And one way that I do a lot of reminders. One way that I stay sober, and I have 2 reminders that pop up in my Gmail every day. One says I am not responsible for my income. And the other says that I submit every detail of my life, because I think it all goes back to that first step, and that I have to submit. And it's even harder on the things that you know something about. I used to think I knew something about, I would try not to drink, and I made all the effort I could not to drink, but I would still end up drinking. I found out when I came to AA, I didn't wait until I wanted to drink. I started my day submitting to God and believing God that he was going to provide me the spiritual solution so that I wouldn't want to drink today. So I had to take a different attitude about my drinking. So I started thinking about that, and I said, maybe I need to take the same attitude about my work with that too. So starting in the morning, submitting my work to God instead of me doing everything I could. And then once I got stressed, pray about it.
I love it. I love it, man.
Instead of doing that, turning around and saying, okay, God, I'm submitting my work to you today. I believe you to do your will in my life and show me your will and the power to carry that out today, whatever that is. And I quit praying for things. I mean, I've had major things happen in life, and I was taught that you pray for what you need, and when it doesn't happen, you did something wrong. That was really the essence of it. There was something wrong with you because God always does good stuff, and so that was what I understood, whether it was right or wrong.
Yep, same here.
Now I know that God just works his will in my life, and I just believe what comes along today is the will of God for me. And if I can accept that and not be concerned with the outcome, then I can be at peace no matter what's going on because I know God's in charge of it. So I just try to take that attitude with my work. I've tried to take that attitude with my relationships. And what I found was that if I look at every relationship in my life and apply the program to it, and the way I would do that would be I would submit that relationship to God. I would clean up any issues that would be in that relationship, which I've done through when I worked the steps. And then I would continue to keep that relationship right. And then I would find some way to be of service in that relationship. So let's say my wife, for example, we start our day with, I make her a cup of coffee and bring it to bed and wake her up in the mornings. So I start our day like that. And almost every conversation I have with her or with anyone in that conversation with, what else can I do for you? Is there anything else you need from me today? And what I found was that the more that I work towards service in all these practicing these principles in all our affairs, and it says practicing. So it's like a doctor practices or an attorney practices. I mean, we're practicing. We're not going to do it perfectly, but we're practicing. We're doing this thing better. We're learning how. And if I do that, I have found that now more times than not, I want to do something for someone good rather than looking at that person and saying, what can I get from this person? What can I take from them? I have the opposite approach of what can I do for them? And it's incredible how much peace and joy that brings in your life.
Yes.
It is unbelievable. And for me, that's practicing this program in all my affairs, and I got my big book out. And I was thinking about this earlier today, as a matter of fact. This is on page 84. This is talking about step 10. And when I started thinking about my business and applying the program to my business, think about your work with step 10. This is at the bottom of page 84. It says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear in your work. Wow. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly. If we've harmed anyone, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code, and if I can apply that in everything in my life, every relationship with my kids, I even found I would show up at the grocery store and not take the best parking space, but leave the best parking space for somebody else. That is the opposite. I would run around looking for the best spot, but now, I've learned to leave that for somebody else. That's the way I can do service. Everything, it just seems to be getting into every part of my life. And it's unbelievable. I've never had such a good life. I've never had such an easy life. And I still have situations come up. I still have things happen, but I just know I don't have to be in charge anymore. It's not up to me. And that's what's great about it. And I'm able to work with sponsees and share these things. I've got one sponsee he's got a fatal illness, and he knows with time that he'll be in a wheelchair and that he'll eventually die from this illness. And I thought, man, how do I sponsor him? And then I said, God, what do I do? I said, because I don't know what to do with this. And it immediately came to me what I needed to do. I asked him, I said, okay, what service can you do? He said, what do you mean? I said, you've got to make this about someone other than yourself. I said, how can you do service in this? And he contacted the lady that ran the website that covered this sickness, and he started volunteering, answering questions on the website, and he started getting relief from helping someone else with the same illness. And it's just crazy how this program works, and it will work in every area of your life if you'll apply it. And for me, the first step is, you've got to submit, trust God, clean house, and help others. It's really a simple deal. and it's never about me, and it's always a gift. Like the promises. I read the promises. I just realized this the other day, that the action in the promises is toward other people. Self-seeking will slip away. Why would I want self-seeking to slip away? I would think I would want more. I would want it to be more about me,
Yeah.
But we find out that we get peace, we get serenity, and every action that we have in the promises is all towards someone other than ourselves. It's never about us. Never. So I just love this program, and I love what it's done in my life. It's made every relationship I have better. I'll kid friends of mine, if I'm in a meeting sometimes, and if I have a disagreement with someone, or there's someone in a meeting I just don't like, and that does happen. If that happens, I especially pay attention to what they share. And if they haven't shared, a lot of times I'll call on them, because I need to hear them, and I need to submit to what they have to say, because a lot of times I will hear what I need from them. Then when I share, I try to always ask God first, what can I share that will help somebody, not what I can share that'll make me look spiritual and, this big AA person. So I work hard at that. And AA saved my life, oh, it really has. But, I've just learned to practice this in all my affairs. And if, if I'm stressed about something, I know it's something in me that's got to change. It's me that's the problem. It's never someone else. It's always me. And we've got this kit of tools to use. And if we'll apply them, God will meet us there. So that's what I have.
Wow.
That's what I have.
Buddy, you have a lot, my brother. You have a lot. This is a spectacular example of experience, strength, and hope, and more importantly, faith. I love your message, brother. I love your message.
I was happy, I was able to share with you guys. But, man, I love your podcast. I like what you're doing. I think it's touching a lot of folks.
Well, I tell you what, I'm so grateful that I got an opportunity to record your message, because I remember when we spoke, and you're so humble, and you say, well, I don't know if I have a message, and I've taken down some notes, and I remember when we said, you know what, you don't need notes, you just need God, right? And you were like, yeah, that's right. Oh, that's it. That's all. And,
yeah.
And it's so funny. I was having some technical difficulties at my office, so I called up my sponsor, who lives up the street from my office, and I was like, hey, you mind if I do a recording over at your house? And he's like, yeah, man, of course, come on over. And we had just finished having lunch today, and we were talking about exactly the same thing that you were sharing about, which is allowing God to guide us and to drive the car, drive the boat, whatever it is that, whatever mental image you have of what God is driving, you have to let him do the driving. You do the work, right? Mm-hmm. You leave the results in God's hands. And, I had some situations in my life where we were just talking about that. And he looked at me and he says, well, maybe you're not letting God, do his job. Maybe you're trying to do God's job for him. And at that particular moment, it was exactly what I needed to hear. It's so funny how as a sponsor, I can give such amazing suggestions, and I can, right. and I can see my sponsee from across going, wow, man, that's just what I needed to hear. But for the love of all that is good on this planet, I cannot sponsor myself.
No, we always need a sponsor, and for no other reason but that we need to submit to someone.
Yeah.
For me, I really believe that's the key, is submitting.
Yes.
Because I want to be in charge. Mm-hmm. I want to play God. And if I'm playing God, then I'm not letting God be God. That's a recipe for trouble, and it's going to end up derailing things. And, I used to see that bumper sticker all the time, God's my co-pilot. Mm-hmm. I don't need a co-pilot. I don't need to be in the cockpit. I don't need to be near the controls.
Why don't you just take a back seat and relax?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where we're really supposed to be, is in the rest. And I think it's called the rest of God, really. It's where we've done our part, and we're resting and we're relaxing, and we know that God's going to do his part. And I used to think my part was, okay, God, you show me twice and I'll take it from there. I can do it. I just need some instruction, and you can just let me have it and I'll take care of it. And it works against all those things that, I've gone to all the motivational speakers and I've done real estate coaching and all these different things related to real estate over the years, ran an investment association and all kinds of things. But what I found was all the teaching out there, all the self-help, this is not a self-help program. This is a self-sacrifice program.
Yes.
And the self-help is not about God showing us and we taking it from there. It's about us learning how to be more powerless. The best I can ever do is be more powerless. And that's never going to change, because the weaker I get, the stronger I become. That's one of the paradoxes that we hear, and the weaker, we got to give it away to keep it. It's the opposite of what we think. And it's not about making us a better person. It's about making us a more surrendered person and
Absolutely.
being more dependent, not less dependent, and I think we lose sight of that because we want to take the things that we learn outside of AA and apply them to AA. And it's just not that way.
No, absolutely not. And the thing I like the most about what you were talking about is just all the ways of getting yourself out of the equation, constantly finding new ways to be of service, to be selfless, to help others in every way that you can, and all the benefits that come from helping others. I love the story about your sponsee where you're trying to figure out how to help him, and he's just got to figure out how he can be of service. Every aspect, every question. I've said this. I remember when I shared my story, it was the first time I had heard this at a regional convention, and the speaker had said, I believe that in my life, I can answer every question with God. And that was so powerful, so profound. I felt so much comfort from hearing those words. And later on, I found that it's just about being selfless and being of service.
And the way that happens, though, is by me usually making my life about someone else. I remember one time I was getting away to go have some time with God. And this was this was before I ever got in AA. This was a long time before that. Actually, I was a teenager, and I was down at Cumberland Island, and the ferry was fixing to leave to go to the island. And there was a lady in front of me that was using the phone, and I needed to use the phone before I got on the ferry. And she didn't have enough change. I had extra change in my pocket, but I wouldn't give it to her because I needed her to get out of my way so I could make my phone call. And so I'm sitting here and all this happens, and then after it happens, I thought, I just missed God because God was showing me before I got to the island and I messed it up. So it's funny, God arranges those situations in our life just to show us how much of ourself is still there. And it's all about, it's about the service. The work that I do is usually about someone else. And there's so many ways I've learned and little tools I've learned with that. Like if I'm riding down the road and I've got a slow person in front of me, a lot of times I'll just say, I need to make this moment about them. I'll give them this moment of my time.
Yeah.
Little tools like that you learn when you start trying to practice this. And all you got to do when something comes up, you say, okay, God, how do I handle this? What do I do? How do I submit in this situation? And usually it's the opposite of what I really want to do, because what I really want to do is usually the selfish choice. So if I usually do the opposite of what I want to do, not what I think's the right idea, is usually the right thing to do. But man, this program is progress and not perfection. I mean, it's just doing it one day after another and just and reaping the benefits.
No
and
question.
It's incredible. It is absolutely incredible. I've got the best relationships with all the people in my life now that I've ever had before. Most satisfying, and it all comes from being service, and I have to do less than I've ever done. It's not like I'm doing more and having more peace and joy. I'm doing less and having more peace and joy.
I think there's a shift, and maybe it feels like you're doing less because it sounds like you're a very active guy, buddy.
I am. Yeah.
I think it just feels like you're doing less because everything you do, you bring God into the equation and you love it.
And you don't have to carry that weight. I used to carry that weight of the world on I had to figure out everything for my kids. I had to figure out everything for my family. It was my responsibility to make all of this happen. And if it wasn't happening, it was my fault. I had to make it happen. And I just gave that up. I said, God, if I succeed or if I fail, it's your business, not mine.
That's beautiful.
God's not only in our successes, he's in our failures too, because I learn a lot more from my failures than I do my successes. So, it's just facts of life, and when we get right down to it, then that's usually it. So that's the way it works for me. That's my experience. And that's what I tell my sponsees. Like you said, I make suggestions for them. And I said, well, this is how I did it. Or, this is what happened to me. And you can glean from that, what you want. But this is what I did, And so
Well, this is.
I think God puts us where we need to be.
Yeah. Well, He's put you here right now, and if for those of you that are listening and you're newcomers, make sure to rewind this and take notes, because there was a lot of great material in here. Buddy's got some great suggestions. I love the little alerts on my phone. I love getting up in the morning and the thought of just surrendering my day, my responsibilities to God. I love all of this. There's a lot of great information. And, I've done a lot of interviews, and a lot of people have gone into great details and share their stories, and they're beautiful stories. And they're beautiful stories with a lot of details. But one of the things I got out of your story the most is that there was a huge concentration on your recovery and a huge concentration on what you did and what you've done to be where you're at today. And any newcomers that are listening can get tons and tons and tons of information. And more importantly, it's almost like a blueprint or a roadmap to staying in recovery and staying sober and being happy. Because when you are out there helping other people, when you are allowing God to work into your life, then the happiness and the gratitude abounds.
Yes.
100%.
And Bill Wilson said that there's nothing that ensures, how do you say it? That there's nothing that ensures that you won't drink like working with another alcoholic. That's not verbatim, but that's more or less what he said.
Yeah.
Was that working with another alcoholic would ensure him from drinking. And he wasn't talking about doing something as giving back, like he was so grateful he was giving back and because he was grateful he was sober. He said that if he worked with other alcoholics, it kept him from drinking himself. So this is when he was actually struggling and he wanted to drink. If he worked with other alcoholics, that would keep him from drinking. So this wasn't something he was waiting till he was, God's man of faith and power and high up in that, that kind of deal. He did this when he was hurting. My first sponsor again, he had a day that he wanted to drink so bad, he said, and he couldn't find anybody. He couldn't find a sponsor, nobody in the program. Everyone was out doing something on a nice Saturday, and he couldn't get anyone. So he drove 2 hours to the VA hospital, and he volunteered in the wet brain ward to work with the wet brains at the VA hospital, and it got him through it.
Absolutely.
And, I'm not saying you need to go work with wet drunks when you're new in the program, but what I'm saying is working with other people will relieve your alcohol problem. It will relieve those symptoms, and it does for me. But just the more we make this about something other than ourselves, I think the more we're going to see God work in our lives and the more He can use us.
I'll agree 100%. All right, buddy. Well, listen, we got to close up here because we're getting to the end of the show.
Cool.
So
all right.
I want to discuss one of my favorite parts of the show, which is for the newcomer. Okay. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and you're going to respond with inspiring and insightful answers we can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
Let's hope so.
I'm confident. All right. So
it helped that you gave me these questions beforehand. So I'm ready.
I love it. All right. So number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
I believe it just took what it took. There was nothing keeping me from it. It just took all those drinks. It took all those issues. It took failed businesses. It took every circumstance I had to get me to the point that I was willing to submit. I was willing to give up and say, okay, God, I can't do this. I keep trying and I can't. So I'm a big believer in providence. I really believe it just takes every drop, and there's no way I can short circuit it.
No.
It takes what it takes. When I have a sponsee go back out, I say, well, when you're ready, come on, we'll do it again. He says, well, you're not upset with me? I said, why should I be upset? You're drunk. I said, if you've had enough, let's get going and we'll see. And if you're ready, I'm ready, and I just think it takes what it takes. And there's no way I could short circuit it or say, oh, if this would have happened or if this, I just think it was what it took. I really do.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. All right. So number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
It was that first meeting that I mentioned. I really saw it there, and the light bulb went off. Granted, it took 6 more years before I was able to put any time together, but I knew from that first meeting that AA was the answer. I knew that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
Yeah, it's a very small book. I'm not a big reader. I listen to a lot of audio on my motorcycle when I ride, and in the office too, actually. But I have one little book. It's called Practicing the Presence of God. And it's by Brother Lawrence. He was a monk in the 1400s in France. And he has a very good, it's a thin little book. I buy them actually 10 and 12 at a time and give them to sponsees and give them out. It's just a simple little book of how he learned how to practice the presence of God on a continual basis. And it was very helpful to me. It's called Practicing the Presence of God. You can get it. You can also get an audio of that too. You can download that for free online. Google Practicing the Presence of God, Brother Lawrence, MP3. And if you like listening to audios, and you can get that. But it's a great little book, and I reread it pretty often.
Wonderful. Beautiful. And buddy, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
To surround myself with a program, to not only just go to meetings, not only keep coming back, which we hear a lot, but just surround myself with the program in every way possible, with CDs in the car, with screensavers on my computer. I've got verses and excerpts out of the big book taped to my monitors, to having all these things around me all the time, that everywhere I look, I see recovery. I have tons of audio on my motorcycle. I've got the big book. I've got the whole New Testament. I've got the 12 and 12. I've got Joe and Charlie. I can ride to California and back and never listen to the same thing. And they all recover.
I love it, man.
And that's the kind of stuff that I need around me a lot. And I have speaker apps on my phone that I can listen to speakers. And I just surround myself with the program, because you just got to jump all in, really. That's bottom line. Whatever it takes for you to jump in, you just got to do it. Yeah. Because until, we read that half measures availed us nothing. I don't think that means doing it wrong. I think that means we just make a half-ass try at it, and we've got to be in 100%. And if we're in 100%, God will meet us there. So for me, it just takes all of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And if you could give our newcomers only one suggestion, what would it be?
It'd be what I just said, just jump all in.
Be all in.
Jump all in. Don't hold back, because as long as you hold back, this will not work. That's been my experience. As long as I thought I had any part of the solution at all, even a little bit of the solution, it didn't work for me. No matter how much I wanted it, how much I needed it, it didn't matter until I was able to say, God, I am powerless. I cannot do this. If it happens, it's going to be you. Until I was able to say that, and along with I remember when I prayed the prayer, God, work your will in my life, regardless of what it takes.
Beautiful. I love it.
And when I prayed that, it started happening. It started happening when I could sincerely say that. And that took 6 years of getting beat up. And I hope it doesn't take 6 years. There's some people it takes longer, and there's some people come and get one white chip and they're done, But man, it took 6 years for me to say, no, I can't do it. I'm letting go. I held on for that long. And so I would say just jump all in.
Beautiful. All right. Great suggestions, buddy. We have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida. Thanks, so.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview, or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not